Hi, everybody. Hello. How's it going? Good. Hey, Omar. Hi, how are you? Good. You love the ordinance?
Good, thanks. There's a couple of things we can talk about. Let's go. It's good.
Very muy bien. That means very good.
Great job.
Damn right. Hey, buddy. Looking good, man.
I guess, Johnny, we'll just let it go then. It's 6 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting of May 7th to order. I might point out before we get into any of the items that on your agenda, there's a note about filling out a speaker slip. So if you're planning on speaking, you can fill out a speaker slip and give it to our recording secretary. First item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance, and that will be led by Commissioner Martin.
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next order of business is the roll call. Can we get the roll call, please?
Thank you. Chairman Grimm,
Here.
Vice Chair Looney, Commissioner De Jesus,
Here.
Commissioner Hastings,
Here.
Commissioner McCarthy, Commissioner Savage, absent, Commissioner Martin,
Here.
Student Commissioner Ortega, absent, Student Commissioner Takano, absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is approval of the minutes from April 16th. Are there any changes to the minutes? If none, we'd entertain a motion. Commissioner DeJesus?
I make a motion to approve the minutes. from April 16th.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Martin. All in favor, please vote, or excuse me, please vote and lock in. The item passes unanimously with Mr. Savage absent. Okay, the next item on the agenda is oral communication. This is for matters that are not on the agenda. Anyone wishing to speak on any matter not on the agenda can come forward at this time. You will need a speaker slip, and you can give it to the recording secretary as you come forward. If you don't have one but you still want to speak, you can fill one right out afterwards and hand it to the secretary. So with that, is there anybody that wants to speak under oral communication? If not, we'll move on to the public hearings that we have tonight. I will briefly explain the process for the public hearing, and it's a standard format. We use it every meeting. It'll begin with staff with a presentation on the project. Then the applicant is entitled to give their presentation. At that point, the commission will ask questions of either staff or the applicant. We will then open up the public hearing for public speakers. And once those speakers have completed their testimony, we will be closing the public hearing. And from that point, the Planning Commission will discuss the item and then take action. And with that, if we could have the staff report on our first item, which is a request for a skate park over 6 feet. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Chairman Grimm, members of the Planning Commission. The project before you tonight is a skateboard ramp for Elliott Salone. It's a request for a minor use permit. The application number is P23-0101. The subject site is located on the south side of Highland Drive, west of Maryland Drive. It's addressed at 1035 Highland Drive. The parcel is 1.63 acres. It's one legal parcel, and it's currently developed with a single-family home. Surrounding land uses include single-family residences to the north, south, east, and west. The general plan land use designation for the property is medium-low density residential, MLD. The zoning is single-family residential, R1. On February 14, 2023, the City Council approved a policy number 300-16, which requires a minor use permit for skateboard ramps exceeding 6 feet in height. That policy also established review criteria. The project before you tonight is a minor use permit for a skateboard ramp exceeding 6 feet in height. The subject ramp is 12,571 square feet in size. The ramp is located in the rear yard of the property. Ramp height is 14 to 20 feet with a maximum height of 30 feet. The ramp maintains setbacks of 15 feet from the west property line, 10 feet from the east property line, as well as 42 feet from the rear property line. The ramp is constructed of wood and surfaced with a skate-light material. Initial construction of the ramp was in 2013. The submitted site plan indicates a single-family residence to the front of the property with the skateboard ramp located at the rear of the site. The rear property is surrounded by fencing ranging from 6 to 7 feet in height. That fencing material includes chain link, wood, lattice, as well as block wall. Landscaping surrounding the ramp includes mature trees as well as tall bamboo. Here's some aerial photographs of the ramp itself. And here's some photographs of the ramp. In regards to the City Council Policy 300-16, In regards to landscaping and screening of the structure, the existing perimeter landscaping includes mature trees and large bamboo plants. Perimeter fencing, again, includes fencing ranging in height from 6 to 7 feet. Soundproofing, as I indicated before, skate light is a ramp surface material that's typically used on modern ramps, which is used because of the smooth surface and minimal noise generating qualities. The ramp itself has been designed and positioned in a manner to reduce noise and deflect noise away from neighboring properties that parallel the ramp itself. In regards to materials, wood and composite materials were used to construct the deck of the subject ramp, and no metal decking materials were incorporated into the ramp construction. In regards to special events, no special events are scheduled for the ramp. In regards to parking, the subject site currently maintains 2 driveways to accommodate approximately 12 vehicles. The ramp will not be used for business purposes or home occupation. Hours of operation, the ramp is used is 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. In lighting, the ramp is not equipped with lights. And as I mentioned before, the setbacks of the ramp maintain a minimum 10-foot side yard and actually exceeds the rear yard at a distance of 42 feet. With that, staff is recommending the Planning Commission adopt a resolution granting a minor use permit for a skateboard ramp exceeding 6 feet in height at an existing residence located at 1035 Highland Drive. That concludes staff's presentation. Elliot Salone, the property owner, is here to introduce himself and to answer any questions the Planning Commission might have. Thank you.
Mr. Sloan?
Good evening. My name is Elliot Sloan. I'm a professional skateboarder and a 16-time X Games medalist. I'm originally from New York, and I moved to Vista in 2005 with the dream of becoming a professional skateboarder and to one day own a property with a ramp on it. My wife and I purchased our home in 2012 with one of the main deciding factors being that we were able to build skate ramps up to 30 feet without a permit. Even with having the right to build such kinds of ramps, I've always seen it as an incredible privilege and have always shown a great deal of respect for my neighbors, and we've kept an open line of communication with all of them. As you may or may not know, we held the X Games in our backyard live on ESPN, and there wasn't a single neighbor that complained. In fact, most of them were there in attendance. I fear that losing the ramps at my house would ultimately lead to losing sponsorships and therefore having to sell the dream home my wife and I have built up over the last 12 years. Vista is my home. I've lived here for almost 20 years now and more than half my life. And, hold on, I got these mixed up. Oh yeah, having the ramps on my property has allowed me to build a career from skateboarding. Most, if not all of my endorsements are based on the ramp setup in the backyard and the content that I produce there. Generally, skate sessions are 2 to 3 hours at max, and there are never skate sessions early in the morning or late at night, and there's never been a need for lighting. Just for reference, skate sessions are usually 2 to 5 p.m. during winter months and 4 to 7 during the summer, and typically 3 to 5 times a week at most, and there are also periods of time where no skating at all is happening. I've also spent a great deal over the years on landscaping and fencing to make sure all my neighbors have privacy, as well as to help cut down on the noise. This is my home. I've lived here for almost 20 years now and more than half my life, and I ask for your deepest consideration in making this decision tonight, and I'd like to thank you all for your time.
Are there any questions of the applicant or staff? If none, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, if there's no questions, let's go ahead and open the public hearing. I have, besides Mr. Sloan, I have one speaker slip. And the name is Hume, I think. H-U-M-E?
We are a neighbor of Elliot's, and I can tell you over all the years, we've lived there 20 years, and we are literally probably 100 feet from his house, and there's never, ever been an issue with anything, whether it be night, day, parking, I can tell you that, any of the issues. So I just want to voice my opinion that I don't think it's a problem in our neighborhood or with our neighbors, and we've all been very supportive of him and his family and what he does.
Thank you for your comments. Other speakers? I don't have any more slips. If you'd like to come forward. And if you wouldn't mind filling a slip out when you're done, thank you.
I will, absolutely. I'm Melissa Miller. I'm also a neighbor. I'm up around the corner, and I absolutely adore it when they are having sessions because I can see over Rose Street and see them popping up over the ramp. It is just so cool. So I highly support approving this minor use permit.
Very good. Well, thank you for your comments. Other speakers? Sure, come forward, please.
I'm Jamie Hume's husband. My name's Dan Hume, and I'd just like to add to it that we were a little nervous when he first moved in, just for where we're located and how close we are, worried about people hanging out at night, worried about different things. We're in a very quiet we're on Stiles Court, little neighborhood in cul-de-sac, and there's never people hanging out. And that's another thing is, even after the X game, there was never trash, there was never people lingering or loitering. And you just wanted to, we'd be really sad to see it go, frankly, because Elliot and his wife have been so generous with their time as well, as far as when they do have X Games, alerting the neighborhood and also letting the kids come in and watch at no charge. And it's been fantastic. I have little kids and, they're wide-eyed and just really excited when that happened. So I could just tell you, as a homeowner, owning a home since '03, it's been actually a pleasure. It hasn't been any kind of hindrance or noise issue at all. So I just wanted to add that.
Very good.
Okay.
And your wife's slip doesn't do you a bit of good.
I'm gonna fill it out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not that Elliot needs my help, but Michelle Martini Brown, I'm on Rose Drive. From my backyard, I can see the back of the ramp as well. Honestly, when I heard the X Games were coming to town, I was like, oh my gosh, the neighborhood's gonna be overrun, there's gonna be cars everywhere, the music is gonna be so loud. It wasn't. Like, literally, had I not known that an event was going on, I wouldn't have known. Parking was taken care of, music was an acceptable level, so even at the most crazy event that you can think of happening in a residential neighborhood, there was no impact. So, highly approve, great neighbor.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to speak on this item? If not, we'll close the public hearing and open it up for Planning Commission discussion. Commissioner Looney.
Thank you. Questions for staff. They have X Games on the property, and it was stated in the report that there's 6 to 8 people maximum, but typically the skate sessions are for 2 to 4 people. I would imagine that the X Games, you're going to have more than 6 to 8 people. Does that require any special permit from the city if there is more than 6 to 8 people? I just want to make sure they don't get into trouble if they have future events.
Actually, 2 things. Number one, Mr. Elliott has indicated there wouldn't be another event, and if so, he'd be required pursuant to the policy to come back to the Planning Commission and get approval prior to that event. So in the event he wanted to hold X Games at his house again, or there was another major event, he'd be required to go before the Planning Commission and get approval of an event. But as of right now, he has indicated that he's not expecting to do so.
Okay. 3 other questions. Because he has sponsors because of the ramp, does that define his activity as a business? Because he is generating sponsorships. I would just, is that financial? Is it advertising? Could you clarify that?
No, I don't foresee that, and he doesn't currently hold a business license or home occupation at the house in terms of a license.
Okay.
I don't think the city would identify his activities of being a business, and he doesn't utilize that address for a business address.
Two more. Will the city perform any type of structural review of the structure before it's approved?
So pursuant to the building official, this ramp would be considered a recreational play structure. Therefore, the city would not be doing an inspection or issuing a business license, or excuse me, issuing a building permit for the structure itself. And there's indemnification associated with the approval of this entitlement as well.
Okay. Thanks. That was all. Thanks.
Since the hearing is closed, are there any other comments from the Planning Commission? Commissioner Martin?
I'd like to congratulate Mr. Sloan and his wife. By all accounts, it seems like they're excellent neighbors and keep in touch with their neighbors as far as when an event could possibly be happening, and as well as kind of keeping a lid on the activities that are occurring on their property. So by all accounts, it sounds like it's a pretty good thing, and I'll support it.
Commissioner DeJesus?
Commissioner Martin just took every thought out of my head. I think it's a very responsible thing. It was lovely to hear from the neighbors, and I know staff has put this together in a way that makes sense to me, and I'm comfortable with it. And to that end, I'd like to make a motion.
Very good. Proceed.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution P240101, granting a minor use permit for a skateboard ramp exceeding 6 feet in height at an existing single-family residence located at 1035 Highland Drive.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Very good. So we have a motion and a second for approval. If you'd cast your votes, please, and lock in. And it passes unanimously. Congratulations. Okay, the second public hearing involves amendment to the code for short-term rentals. And if we could get a staff report, please.
Thank you, Chairperson Grimm and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Joe Vaca, and I've worked closely with Amanda, our city attorney, on drafting this short-term rental permit ordinance that's going to be presented to the Planning Commission and the public this evening. So with that, I'll get started on the presentation. So we have seen an increase in short-term rentals here in Vista over the last several years. They've become more prevalent, and they have contributed to our local economic development base and helped with restaurants and tourism. But we do need to regulate short-term rentals to make sure that they're compatible within the neighborhoods where they're existing, and that they are done in such a way where, with the regulations, we're safeguarding the peace, safety, and general welfare of our existing residential neighborhoods. So in Vista, as far as we know, we actually have 36 short-term rental businesses that have been licensed through the city, and they are currently paying transient occupancy taxes. We have 4 in District 1, 18 short-term rentals in District 2, In District 3, we have 8, and then in District 4, we have 6. So in March of last year, Deputy Mayor Melendez placed short-term rentals on the agenda for city council discussion based on some challenges of some properties within the city. And we had 15 public speakers, and ultimately they voiced opinions in favor of the city establishing regulations to permit short-term rentals. And the city council ultimately determined that an ordinance should be prepared and wanted staff to work on code amendments to regulate and permit short-term rentals. So therefore, staff has been working on preparation of updates to the Vista Municipal Code and created a new chapter, 8.34, Short-Term Rental Permit Ordinance. And that is regulating and creating a permitting process for short-term rentals. And then also, we've amended Development Code Chapter 1802, very simply just to update the definition of guest house. So we'll start from the beginning of the draft ordinance. Section 8.3410 is the purpose and findings and determinations. And ultimately, we're trying to establish reasonable regulations for short-term rentals to make it effective for staff and code enforcement to permit and monitor, but also ultimately to safeguard the peace, safety, and general welfare of neighborhoods within the city. We want to minimize negative secondary effects that may be related to short-term rentals, such as excessive noise, disorderly conduct or parties, illegal parking, overcrowding, and excessive accumulation of trash. We want to make sure that by reducing any adverse impacts of short-term rentals, that these regulations then will ensure compatibility with the existing neighborhoods here in Vista. Next is definitions. We've created definitions for agent, bedroom, broker. A hosted unit means that the host of the actual short-term rental unit lives on site, and a non-hosted unit is the opposite. The short-term rental doesn't have a host living there. And then, of course, owner. And then we've defined short-term rental as the rental of any legally permitted dwelling unit or any portion of any legally permitted dwelling unit, including detached single-family residences, guest houses, condominiums, duplexes, townhomes, and units in multifamily dwellings for occupancy for dwelling, lodging, or sleeping purposes for a period of 30 consecutive calendar days or less, counting portions of calendar days as full days. It's important to note that short-term rentals are not going to be allowed in any accessory dwelling unit or any trailer coach or in any oversized recreation vehicle. So short-term rentals in the draft ordinance will be allowed in all residential zones and in residential use areas within specific plans. The update authorizes that owners could have agents authorized to manage their short-term rental units, and owners and agents, of course, together must comply with all short-term rental requirements. Just for the public and for the commission, STR obviously is the abbreviation of short-term rental. So prior to renting or advertising any short-term rental unit, the owner or agent must first obtain a business license with the city, complete a transient occupancy registration certificate, and as part of the ordinance, we're creating a short-term rental permit that would go through the Community Development Department Planning Division. Short-term rental permit application will be required, and it must be on the city-approved form. It must definitely be complete, accurate, and truthful. The applicant must also pay for their business license and the short-term rental permit fee, which is being prepared for council consideration. And they must also pay their transient occupancy tax annually. Any false statements on the application are grounds for denial or revocation of the permit. A short-term rental permittee also will, by applying for a permit, agree to defend and indemnify and hold harmless the city from any and all liability that may arise out of any actions permitted on the short-term rental or by occupants. So the next section deals with the short-term rental operating requirements, and this is kind of the meat of the ordinance because it addresses how short-term rental units must operate. So first, public nuisances are prohibited. Short-term rentals must not have any unruly gatherings nor unruly behavior. And so if someone's trying to utilize a short-term rental as a one-night party house, that's not going to be allowed any longer. Noise violations are also prohibited. They must comply with our noise ordinance. We're limiting occupancy in short-term rentals to 2 persons per bedroom or studio, plus one additional person per dwelling. So for example, a 3-bedroom house would have an occupancy of 7 persons. Again, it's 2 persons per bedroom plus one additional person. With parking, as part of the permit process, they must indicate how much parking is available on-site, and the parking must not exceed the on-site parking beyond what's approved by the permit. So a single-family house that's used as a short-term rental by our parking ordinance is required to have 4 on-site parking spaces, and we would expect that as part of that permit application, they would provide those 4 on-site parking spaces for the occupants of the short-term rental. If it's in a multifamily zone, the parking requirements are different, but they must comply with that and make sure they provide that for their occupants. Continuing with operating requirements with trash and refuse, they must use approved receptacles and comply with refuse requirements for making sure trash is disposed of properly. Short-term rental agreements must comply with all of our permit requirements also. Short-term rental units are only allowed to have natural gas or propane fireplaces. Open wood-burning fire pits or bonfires are no longer going to be permitted at short-term rental units. And with barbecues, they must be propane or natural gas at safe locations and distances, and we would not allow charcoal grills any longer. Continuing with operating requirements, we're not going to allow short-term rental occupants on roofs for roof access. Also, short-term rentals must meet basic life safety requirements with operable smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, and also provide fire extinguishers and first aid kits. As part of the updated operating requirements, the city will be allowed at any time to inspect short-term rental units in response to any complaints received by the city. Short-term rentals are not to be sublet in any way. That'll be prohibited. And special events at short-term rentals, such as weddings or corporate events or bachelor parties or commercial functions, are all going to be prohibited. And then last, no commercial filming is to occur at short-term rental units. We've limited the hours of operation for guests to come and visit. So if my family were to come visit in Vista and rent a short-term rental, I could go and have breakfast with them after 8 a.m. and stay with them and reasonably use the property with them, and then I would need to leave by 10 p.m. So the hours for hosting guests is 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. We're not allowing advertising of short-term rentals unless the short-term rental permit has already been reviewed and approved, and any advertisements must conform to our short-term rental permits. So for example, people can't advertise that they're gonna have a one-night party house in a single-family neighborhood because that would not comply with the proposed ordinance requirements. So with the minimum night stay for non-hosted units, meaning that it's a single-family home, for instance, where someone gets access to the property and there's no host on site, there will be a minimum night stay of 2 consecutive nights. This provision, however, will not apply to hosted units or to short-term rental units in multifamily residential dwellings. So there is an existing business license for a short-term rental in an apartment on Santa Fe, and we don't think that that would generate an issue for a party-type scene, and it hasn't been a problem in the past, so people could use that for one night, for example. So this section really is intended to provide that non-hosted units may not be rented for one night, and this is intended purely to avoid one-night rentals for parties. Continuing with the operating requirements, another critically important requirement that's in the ordinance is that the maximum number of short-term rentals is limited for any owner to have a maximum of 5 per city council district. And the reason behind this is that we want to make sure that housing is really intended to be used and made available for longer-term housing. And this also guards against any multifamily residential apartment project, for instance, being converted fully to a hotel. As part of the operating requirements, there will be, as part of the permit, an interior display of the short-term rental permit, and that must include the permit itself, the maximum number of overnight occupants, the maximum number of vehicles to be parked on site, and a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week local phone number for a local contact person. We're also requiring an exterior-facing sign that's going to be displayed on the interior of the short-term rental unit in a front window facing the public. That will also provide the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week local phone number of a designated contact person to take complaints regarding the unit. the number of bedrooms and occupancy, and the number of vehicles that are supposed to be parked on site. The responsible person who's managing or responsible for the short-term rental unit must respond to any notification that there's been an issue by occupants or guests as soon as practically possible, but at the very minimum within 24 hours. And then, of course, our ordinance requires that short-term rentals comply with all applicable laws within our municipal code and any other federal, state, or laws, rules, or regulations. So with any violation, we do have enforcement and penalties that have been drafted into the proposed short-term rental ordinance, and they actually exceed the fines that our traditional administrative citations would charge. So a first administrative citation, that would be a fine not to exceed $500 per violation. So if there's multiple violations, it would be $500 per violation for each provision of the chapter. Then it elevates to $1,000 for second administrative citation, and then for a third or subsequent administrative citation within 1 year, it would elevate to $1,500 per violation. So with the short-term rentals, the permit may be denied, suspended, or revoked by the city manager or designee. And the grounds for denial or suspension would be, for instance, if the application or renewal application does not comply with the requirements of this ordinance, if there's been any false or misleading information included on the application or renewal application, if there's been any health or safety violations, if there's been a felony violation on site, and then if there's been a delinquency in payment of fees or transient occupancy tax. So built into the proposed ordinance is a 3 strikes revocation requirement. So if there's been a third administrative citation issued for violations of a short-term rental unit within 1 year, the city will immediately revoke the short-term rental permit. Also, if there's been any determination that a felony violation has occurred at a short-term rental unit, then the city will also immediately revoke the short-term rental permit. Any denial, suspension, or revocation is subject to appeal. And if a short-term rental permit is revoked, that short-term rental unit shall not be operated at that property for a period of 12 months. So there's a mandatory cooling off period, and they cannot utilize that property for 1 year, unless the property's been sold and there's a totally new owner and they can demonstrate that the change of property ownership has occurred. So lastly, we updated the definition of guest house because our current definition doesn't allow guest houses to be rented, and now guest houses would be able to be utilized as short-term rental permits. So again, I'd like to thank all of the colleagues in all the various departments and divisions that we work with, predominantly our city attorney's office and Amanda Guy, but also our city manager's office staff. We work closely with Clarence, our code enforcement manager. Economic development, Larry was very helpful. Finance staff was extremely helpful. And police and fire were instrumental in providing input. And then building and safety and planning staff have all been very helpful and supportive. So with that, we are requesting that the commission adopt a resolution to recommend to the city council approval of the ordinance to add the Vista Municipal Code Chapter 8.34 short-term rental permit to our code and to amend Development Code Chapter 18.02 to regulate and create a permitting process for short-term rentals. And after this, we anticipate presenting the Planning Commission's recommendation to the city council at a public hearing on May 28th. So I'm just going to reiterate for the public that after tonight, we anticipate this then going to the city council for consideration of a public hearing on May 28th. That concludes staff's presentation.
Questions of Mr. Vaca? Commissioner Hastings?
I really appreciate all this hard work on this and the idea that containing the short-term rentals so that there's actual residential property available for our residents is so important. What I wasn't sure, I was trying to do arithmetic on this and not getting it, was is there a limit on the number of short-term rentals? That other than the ones that are already identified in the initial?
There's no cap, there's no ultimate cap. However, no owner can own more than 20 in the city.
Right. So if we have a bunch of really ambitious owners, is there some way to stop that, or aren't we worried that there'll be a flood of additional people coming in?
We're not really worried, and if we do see that occurring as a trend, we're very conscientious of having housing for people and housing for families and affordable housing, and so staff will monitor that, and if it becomes an issue, we could bring the ordinance back.
And I would just like to add, it's an annual permit, so it doesn't create a vested right that would run with the land like the minor use permit you considered earlier. So there'd be that opportunity to come back and reevaluate a cap.
And I had one more question, and that was, is this going to be an additional code enforcement burden, or?
Yes and no. In a way, it's actually going to be a relief for code enforcement to have applicable rules that they can utilize to ensure that now short-term rental units are being regulated. Because right now, the only tool we have is to give a business license and make sure they're paying transient occupancy tax, and then our other existing municipal code standards. But now there'll be one chapter, one ordinance that contains all the permit requirements for short-term rentals. So in a way, it should facilitate compliance for the public, for short-term rental permittees, and then if there are issues, everyone knows what the rules are and they'll know what the consequences are. So it should make it better for enforcement.
Excellent, thank you.
Commissioner Looney?
Thank you. Other local agencies have hired additional staff to review social media advertising, and then they compare what's being advertised to what is in the permits as records. So is that something that staff will be doing?
So we're aware of the social media challenges, and we're aware that there are firms that actually specialize in that. And I've been discussing this with our finance director, Mike Sylvia, as a potential option in the future to, if we find that we're not having appropriate tracking and permitting, that maybe we can bring on a firm to specialize in that so that we're making sure people are permitted legitimately and that we're also capturing the transient occupancy tax that we should be due. So we've discussed it. We're not pursuing it right now, but should there be a need, there are options that we can look into.
Okay. Also, typically, owners of investment properties will put that property under an LLC. And so that comes up as the owner. So is there a way to determine who owns that LLC so you limit the number of owners for those?
So we have that circumstance right now where there is two different quote-unquote owners, but it's still the same owner in the city out of the 36 that we have licensed. And so we're just going to have to work with owners, and they're supposed to be honest and forthright in telling us that when they apply for their permit, this is what they own and where. And so it's going to be part of the process, and we're hoping that it works out.
One last question. How is the city informed if there is a felony that takes place on that property?
We would be informed by our sheriff's department,
Okay.
potentially. Maybe not. I mean, it depends. It just depends.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner DeJesus?
I have a question for staff. I have two, actually. I have two questions. You mentioned South Santa Fe. There's one that's owned by a gentleman that owns a couple on the list already, and it's like an apartment, but it's short-term rental. How is that affected by this?
That would be allowed. They'd have to obtain a short-term rental permit for the apartment unit, and they'd provide parking for that unit, and it would be allowed.
But they'll have to do at least a two-night.
No. So the two-night minimum is in single-family zones that are non-hosted. So if it's a hosted unit, or it's in a multifamily building or mixed-use building, then it doesn't need to have the two-night. They could have one night.
All right, that's good to know. And the other thing is that sometimes people want to rent a place for longer than the one-night minimum, but they want to have a wedding there. I know my daughter, they were at a Airbnb in Oceanside on the beach, and they had a wedding, and they didn't need a permit because it was less than 50 people or something like that. So there are occasions when a special permit, would a renter of a short-term rental have to get a permit, or are they just outright not allowed to do anything that might be a special family occasion or something special to them?
We've drafted it so that they really shouldn't be using short-term rentals for special events, such as like a bachelor party or a wedding. But if we had, for instance, a very unique property that was 10 acres, and they could come in and obtain a special use permit or a temporary use permit on top of the short-term rental permit, we might be able to look at that, but the strict interpretation of our ordinance right now to apply citywide is that weddings and special events would not be permitted at short-term rental units.
So on that proposed or imaginary 10-acre lot where you were residents, that would they have to have a public hearing for a special permit to hold a wedding there? I'm just trying to think in advance of, yes, it's a big far out what if, but just because.
I understand the question. Yeah, it's a good question. The thing is that we tried to adopt regulations that would be applicable and reasonable across the board. And so we couldn't hypothesize and take into consideration every what if. But I think that in that very unique circumstance, we just have to look at that on its face and see if there was an opportunity to make an interpretation in the code for that.
One thing I'll add, so we're referencing it's subsection N of one of the new section, or M, special events and temporary uses prohibited. It's couched as prohibited as a component of short-term rental activities. So if you do have a property that wanted to hold itself out separately, not for short-term rental purposes, but separately as a special event venue, they could go through the city's process separately. So it's really, I think we're trying to divorce it from the special, sort of the short-term rental piece of it.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for that. Other than that, I like the putting all of this into words, and I appreciate, this is a hard document to put together, and I appreciate all the hard work that was, and the thought that went into this.
Commissioner Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too appreciate the comprehensive draft that you've provided to us, so thank you for that. I did have one question about HOAs. I'm presuming that there are some HOAs in our city that would not allow short-term rentals, and so I'm wondering if they have a role in this permit process, or is that something that's strictly between the property owner and the association?
Yes, that'd be between the property owner and the association.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? If not, we'll open up the public hearing. I just wanted to say ahead of time, I have a lot of slips here, and I'm going to call them in the order that I received them. The other factor is that you have a maximum of 3 minutes to make your points, so that would be greatly appreciated if you could stay within the 3 minutes. With that, I'd like to call, I believe it's Rick Bernier.
Good evening, my name's Rick Bernier. I'm a short-term rental owner, and I am speaking in favor of the short-term rental permit plan that's in place. This document only pertains to 36 individuals and does not address the most important issue for the city. What is being done to hold accountable those properties that do not have a license? According to this document, the day my license is pulled, I gain 10% in additional revenue, nor do I need to worry about fines levied by the city. Recommendation. The 3 biggest online short-term rental platforms are Airbnb, Booking.com, and VRBO. Each of those platforms already have built into their system a process to have a valid TOT ID number to be listed. This is only enforced when a city requires a business license and has informed the online short-term rental platform of their published rules and regulations. With this coordination complete, the city would be able to remove non-compliant short-term rental listings through simple coordination with the online short-term rental platform. That coordination is what would provide the rigor and accountability to this document. Exterior complaint phone number display. Sorry. In the 1990s, rental car companies ceased renting their cars with rental license plates due to the renters becoming targets for criminal activity. By placing short-term rental details and contact information on display of short-term rentals, we as a city are advertising which people are not from this area. This clearly marks our guests for potential victimization. This also highlights which properties are not continually occupied, making them vulnerable for squatters. Recommendation: once the license has been approved by the city should notify the immediate neighbors in writing, much like they did for the short-term rental public meeting last year, with all the information regarding the short-term rental. This provides the immediate neighbors with the appropriate information if there are any issues and does not identify our guests or neighborhood for potential crime. Violations, enforcement, and penalties. This document clearly articulates every way the short-term rental will be held accountable. Nothing here identifies any protections for the short-term rental. This document shows anyone who is anti-short-term rental how to quickly bankrupt the operation. I expect my property to have 3 violations within 3 days of this document being approved. How are the violations going to be reviewed? Who is going to do it? And what process does a short-term rental responsible person have to counter the claims of the individual initiating the violations? How am I being protected as the individual who is adhering to all VISTA rules and regulations and providing the city with 10% tax from gross proceeds? Recommendation: the city needs to clearly identify the process that will be used to review the violations. This needs to be absolutely transparent. Are we accepting simple voice complaints, or should there be some burden of proof for the city to review? Short-term rental operation requirements. Response requirements. The response to respond to a notification of a violation on the short-term rental property within 24 hours is too long. When a problem happens, it is happening now, not tomorrow. Recommendation: for non-hosted short-term
Omar Ackle? Probably didn't do well on your name, sorry. It's 3 minutes. Yeah.
Everybody, my name is Ömer Açıkel. I live at 1271 Cinchona Street. We are next to a short-term rental, non-hosted, operating for 5 years. So this, first, before I start, for every good work, there is always more work to do, but I'm really thankful for city to come up with these regulations. We first approached the city 2021 for this because we are getting a lot of disturbance from the next door. So I'm really thankful for Mr. Waka and John Conley and Mrs. Melendez, the council member, our district. But again, I was going to mention about the similar things. Since we have less than perfect relationship with the owner next door, we need to have very clear ways to prove that there are violations. And that has to be done because it goes out of hand very fast. Even so-called quiet hours after 10 p.m., in the VV mornings, people go to the pool, do all kinds of weird things, and that has to stop. We have been dealing with this for 5 years, and I would strongly advocate for a mechanism to enforce the laws are very good, but the devil's in the details. So, and the other thing I want to say, there is one thing pop up to my eye, it was about 24 hours also. Carlsbad, Oceanside, Carlsbad has 45-minute response time on their regulations, and Oceanside has 1 hour. So this 24 hours is, I don't know if there might be a purpose of it other than what I cannot think of, but 24 hours, we get very upset with sheriff, by the way. They are overwhelmed, obviously. When they don't show up, we call them after 4 hours, they don't show up. to our inquiries. So 24 hours is not acceptable as far as I'm concerned. And then the quiet hours are meant for residential neighbors, like 10 p.m. to 10 a.m., 8 a.m. And for this kind of establishments, it has to be a bit stricter. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments. Lisa Scott?
Hi, I'm not going to touch the desk. Okay, I don't want to mess with the speaker. Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Scott, and I live at 1271 Cinchona Street in Vista. And I also live next to a non-owner occupied STR. Again, Joe Vaca, the regulations that you put in place, they were really good. And like Omer said, I just think that we just need to tighten up some things. And what I wanted to discuss was the response time. Again, Oceanside and Carlsbad, they either have 45 minutes or an hour response time. When it's 24 hours, whatever was going on at the STR, by that time, the situation is no longer, and the guests may have already been gone, already left. The other thing that I wanted to address was, is there some way that we can have Vista have a dedicated phone line for complaints? I believe Carlsbad has that in place so that we are not calling the owner, but that dedicated phone line. And And if possible, I believe Vista on the website, there should be some type of, the owner's listing should be on the Vista's website, somewhere where there's a log so we can see who has the STR and maybe just their address, and just so that we know the addresses of the STRs. Okay, and I believe that's it. And thank you so much for listening to me tonight.
Very good. Thank you for your comments. Alexandra Martin?
Do I need to push? Oh, it goes. Okay, hi, thank you. Thank you for the time to consider these regulations. Last time I spoke of living next to a dual situation. We have on our street a hosted and a non-hosted unit. The hosted unit, not very a problem. The unhosted, unfortunately, is directly next to me. When I moved in was a nightmare. I could sit here all day and tell you all the crazy things that happen. If you imagined it or saw on the news report, it probably happened. So I'd like to really just say thank you for the highlights here. The prohibiting of weddings and large events. This is, for me, fundamental because these are in the middle of like neighborhoods and houses and homes. We've spoken to my neighbors and I and many other neighbors now in these situations. Many of them directly next to the short-term rentals and everything that goes on in those properties that are no longer homes, but they are businesses. Those directly affect everyday lifestyle, from when you wake up, when you go to bed. These aren't normal use. These are, for example, the outdoor, any amenity that's outside is used not in a normal way. These are usually all day, maybe 3 days in a row, and then the next group comes and they do the same thing. I do have questions on how these strikes will work. Do we have to wait for a police officer? Can we record the actions? I've had many nights where I call an officer and they don't show up till 2:30 in the morning. That doesn't really help me for the last 5 hours before they arrived when these issues happened. So I don't know how we can prove that or what we need to do to be able to have that, I guess. The 24 hours, that would be waiting an entire day. I mean, I've had issues at the house where I couldn't even sleep in my room. I've had to go to the front because these were not dealt with. So if that's what we have to do moving forward, that's really scary. It does worry me, the maximum of 5 per city council district. That would be 20 houses taken away in Vista per person. So for every 5 people, that would be 100. I can't math now, I'm running out of time, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Oscar Ramirez?
Good evening, Planning Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners, and Assistant Commissioner Developer. My name is Oscar Ramirez, and I am in favor of the SDR permit ordinance. My family and I own our home and have lived in Vista for 22 years. We love our home, we love our city. Of the 22 years, 20 years were very enjoyable and memorable. We have weaved memorable times and built great memories around our home and city. We have watched our kids thrive in a safe and clean environment and become adults. Unfortunately, all of this came crashing down into an unpleasant abrupt end on December 14, 2020. This is when an investment conglomerate purchased one of the 5 homes in our neighborhood and established not an SDR, but a party house mini hotel. This is the precise moment when our nightmares commence and have continued fasted consistently and intensely for the last 4 years. Since then, our neighborhood, and our experiences with SDR only revolve around a chronic party house mini hotel with repeated disturbances and nuisances that are affecting our health and safety, peace and quiet, and impeding the enjoyment of our property and neighborhood. I want to share with you a list of some of the nuisances and violations of this SDR party house mini hotel. The place is rented for large gatherings, weddings, and special events. Violations of public decency and indecent exposure, as in open sexual relations, nudity, defecating and urinating in private property, influx of strangers exceeding home occupancy, large gatherings of 60 to 80 people, 20 plus cars, unruly heavy use of offensive language, combative and threatening guests, loud noise, parties, again, loud music, adults and underage drinking, and drug use, as in smoking and God knows what other type of use, drugs use they use. There's raucous active use of the swimming pool, slide, diving board, and hot tub during the day and after hours until 3 to 5 a.m. in the morning. Again, parking issues, illegal parking. My family and I have been verbally and physically threatened, stalked, harassed, and been the recipients of racist remarks. There's much more I can tell you, but I will break.
Thank you for your comments. Paul Badali?
And I'm an owner of a short-term property. Recently purchased one in Vista. Lived in Vista for 5 years and ended up saving my money for the last 5 years, living on a friend's couch to be able to afford this house. And the only means of me to be able to purchase this home was to do short-term rental. And so the home has a mother-in-law suite, and I get it. There are probably total different homes that are not owner-occupied, and it's probably something totally different than what I'm doing. But for me, me and my girlfriend live in the mother-in-law suite. We rent out the main portion of the house. And we have strict rules and regulations. We would probably confine to 95% of the permitting orders you guys recommended. One note that I wanted to suggest is the amount of size of people that could rent in the room. For example, I have a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 1,800 square feet that I'm renting out, and that would only allow me to have 4 occupants. But realistically, I could probably do 6, as it's set up perfectly for that throughout the house. At the end of the day, I believe short-term rental is the way how younger generations can help get into housing. To be honest with everyone, my mortgage is $6,700 a month. I make $200,000 a year, and I can still barely afford that with short-term rental on top of that. So I think it's a great opportunity for individuals to get in the housing market and become a real estate owner, just like our older generations had before us. That's all I got.
Thank you very much. Jacob Aldridge?
City of Vista. Short-term rentals by nature are not evil. You buy a house or apartment, rent it out, attract vacationers at below hotel prices, everybody wins. There's another part to this story. I work in San Diego County every day. I laugh in San Diego, I cry in San Diego, I got married in San Diego. I want to raise a family in San Diego, but a mortgage on a 3-bedroom home, not necessarily a house, is over $4,000. Obvious question, what does this have to do with Airbnb or short-term rentals? A study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that between 2012 and 2016, that the existence of Airbnbs was responsible for about 20% of the rent increase in the United States during those years. San Diego almost certainly has an outsized representation in this statistic, given that in 2023, we have almost twice the Airbnb concentration per 1,000 residents as New York City. In Irvine, California, a ban on Airbnbs resulted in a 3% rent reduction across 2 years. In a world with adequate housing supply, short-term rentals would be victimless, maybe even good. But this is not a world with an adequate housing supply. The minor benefits of allowing short-term rentals are significantly outweighed by the proven direct detrimental effect it has on a fundamental need to support a family. City of Vista, you and I have a social contract. I am a contributing citizen. You provide a society that can support my needs as a human. Please uphold your side of the contract and ban Airbnbs except in hosted units, and do not adopt this ordinance as written. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie Michael or Carrie Michelle?
Hello. I live right next to an STR. I've lived in my house since 1977, and the STR is, I don't even know, Joe, if it's even on the list of on your map. They have parties, they have loud parties, they have parking. I live right close to, I'm on Crescent Drive, but up above me is Orlevo, and the cars are parked. And they have a party all up and down that street, and they leave their trash, they break bottles. Our neighbor across the street came home, and there was a boy in there, a guy peeing on his front yard. So, and then we have on the other side of the house is a woman who lives there, and there's a basketball court in the backyard of the SDR, and people have broken her fence to go over and retrieve basketballs, which is trespassing, right? Shouldn't that be a violation? They're violating her property. So I'm just wondering, I think a lot of the good things are on this ordinance, and I'm hoping that most of it passes, but 24 hours, of course, is not gonna work. So we need quick access when they violate. And I'm sure there's underage drinking there, and it's not a hosted house. I would really like the ordinance to pass, but I'd like to see that the house next door is on the list. 853 Crescent Drive. Because I don't even know if he's paying the tax next door. One thing, he says not to call him, the owner, he says to text him, and occasionally we've texted him at after 10 when they've had a party, and he has quieted them down, but not always. In my sleep, I don't get any sleep. So about 11 houses around us have no rest when they have their parties. So I like the ordinance. Most of it's positive. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Baca. Did you want to respond?
I did just want to share with the speaker and the public that I believe the property she's referring to is 853 Crescent Drive, and there is no existing business license for the short-term rental at that location. And I want to make it perfectly clear that if this ordinance is effectuated, then that property must comply by obtaining a short-term rental permit, business license, and paying transient occupancy tax, and must comply with all the rules and regulations.
Thank you for that clarification. Anna Strawn?
So perhaps 853 should not be allowed to ever have a permit. There are concerns nationwide about short-term rentals and how to regulate them in neighborhoods. Chattanooga has paused all applications for STR that aren't owner-occupied. In Hawaii, 52% of STRs are owned by out-of-state residents, and 22% of those owners have 20 or more properties. Due to a serious housing shortage, counties there can now choose to get rid of STRs. Maui County plans to phase out 2,200 vacation rentals in West Maui, and an action that will be expanded to eliminate all 7,000 STRs in Maui by the date of January 2026. In 2022, Dallas voted to define STRs as lodging in an attempt to prevent such properties existing in single-family residential neighborhoods. Remember, these are R1 districts. These are not commercial districts for business. Liability is a concern for STRs, and Marco Island in Florida requires STRs to hold a liability insurance policy of $1 million. Santa Monica requires STRs to be owner-occupied and sets a minimum of 30-day rentals, as does New York City and many others. Los Angeles City Council will soon require a short-term rental to obtain a police permit at a suggested cost of $260 per permit. Applicants must also submit a business license, tax information, and divulge any previous criminal history. STRs must keep records for city inspection. Closer to home, Oceanside's new regulations limit non-hosted short-term rentals and a required 5-bedroom cap for STRs. Oceanside also has a new category of fines for threats to public safety and operating without a permit. Will Vista enact and enforce fines like Oceanside? How will Vista address complaints about STRs? How will Vista support the sheriffs in answering nuisance calls, noise calls, and calls of even more serious nature? Will Vista require a minimum stay of at least 3 days, since the proposed 2-day minimum is insufficient? Will Vista establish an owner-occupied regulation? Will Vista apply STR rules and regulations to apartments and condos as other cities have done? Will Vista establish a website dedicated to STRs so we can properly regulate, monitor, and contact speedily in case of an emergency? Will Vista monitor ownership of STRs and require liability insurance? Will Vista have a department or an employee dedicated to STRs and enforcement of rules?
Thank you. Next speaker would be Larry Rutherford.
Hi. First, I want to thank members here tonight for taking their time to listen to all of us and for Joe Backus. I live in a very short distance away from STR. I feel like I've come to the table late for dinner because these are my neighbors who are talking, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of the things that they have already said. I can only tell you one thing is that what goes on at this STR is parties every night sometimes 7 days a week, different one. Everything that people have talked about, that's what goes on. So, and the way that it has affected the people that live around it, I feel bad for them. I live probably a half a block away from it, but it's still there. I walk out my front door every morning and I see it and I look at it. I'm like, there's 10 cars sitting inside the perimeter of this place. It's constantly in my mind. I can't get away from it. I'll tell you a funny story here. I was driving home yesterday. I was going down the street, and where I should have turned to go up to my house, I found myself looking to the left to look at the STR house and drove past the intersection. Turned around at the next intersection, drove back, and I looked at the house again, only this time it was on my right. So being preoccupied that much, and there wasn't anyone there, but it still got my attention. I know it's not licensed. They don't have a business license. They're just having a good time. And I think this is a good start, and I'd like to see this go forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Bill Froelich?
Thank you, Mr. Baca. We greatly appreciate you. Thank you for coming here and listening to us. You've heard pretty much everything I want to say. Lisa, you said something about events. You know, what's an event? To us, an event is 15 people over every single day, whether it's daytime or nighttime, all their lights strung out so we can see them through the dark every day, every night. It's just been a nightmare. So having a 3-strike system to get rid of what most likely is a few bad apple owners that won't modify the means of advertising, won't modify the means of screening who their guests are, is a great thing, as long as those strikes can be counted quickly and easily enough and fairly. I understand one of the owner's comments perhaps about it may, there may be a bias of the neighbors now looking to get rid of an Airbnb. Honestly, we don't want to think about them. A good Airbnb is something that our neighborhood doesn't have to think about at all. You don't want to think about that every day that you come home from work going, I wonder what's going to happen tonight. You want to think about dinner and your family and your outside yard. We think about it every night. For some people that have these bad apples, it's a nightmare. So make the teeth big and strong. Make it so the uncompliant ones will comply. My personal opinion is businesses don't belong in residential areas. We all go to work at a business, we come home. I don't want to see a business, especially one that's a party business. Even if it's a family that has a birthday party and they rent it for 2 nights a week, if they do that 5 times or however many nights a week, then it's just a constant thing. Something, all the other cities are working to do something with this. There's a reason. Please be strong and good and protect your citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Froelich. Wyatt Jackson? Wyatt Jackson? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Wyatt Jackson. My mom operates a firm called Vacation Rentals by Kimberly. She manages a handful of Vista short-term rentals. I support the approval of the new short-term rental ordinance. The proposed rules and regulations are reasonable. I also want to add that my mom employs 3 full-time employees that reside locally here in Oceanside. Thank you.
Thank you. Kimberly Jackson?
Honorable Commissioners, thanks for having us. My name's Kimberly, and I come from Vacation Rentals by Kimberly, a very small local firm that professionally manages a small handful of Vista vacation rentals for Vista residents. I want to first apologize to all of these poor people who are dealing with issues like this. A lot of these issues come from unpermitted rentals and the process of not having rules in place, so I think we have some really good framework here. I would like to offer to all these residents, if you need help, I'm happy to talk to all of those owners for you. That kind of stuff should not happen. There should be no gatherings or parties allowed in any vacation rental. If they want to go get a permit for special usage on a 10-acre parcel, fine, but in a residential neighborhood, absolutely not. No parties or gatherings of any kind. In fact, my firm asks for quiet hours of 9 p.m. till 9 a.m. out of respect for the neighborhood. The number one deal in this business is not to impact the neighborhood. So trash, parking, noise ordinances, occupancy, I think are all very important issues that need to be addressed, and they have been addressed in your ordinance that's proposed. I also like the no charcoal or wood burning fireplaces outside. I don't even like the wood burning fireplaces inside. The 2-night stay is absolutely mandatory. 1-night stays are parties. No 1-night stays, ever. 3 strikes and you're out, absolutely. All of these people that are operating next to these people don't have permits, and they need to comply immediately. They should be paying back taxes on TOT. It's not fair to the other operators either, who are paying into the city funds to help deal with all these issues when these residents are not. So I would like all of you guys to give me those addresses so I can personally go talk to them, even if you don't want me to, because it's not fair, and it's not fair to the city. Regarding Commissioner Hastings' worried about proliferation, this is kind of a self-correcting industry, meaning that if there's too much supply, then people aren't making their nightly rent that they want to be making, and they sit vacant and they go away. The owners end up converting. So I wouldn't worry too much about proliferation, especially you're not at the beach. At the coast, we deal with more of that, but it does self-correct. People go away because they're not getting rented. Regarding Commissioner Looney's issue with LLCs and living trusts, and a lot of responsible homeowners or people who have homes put them into LLCs even if they're not vacation rentals for protection. If a gardener slips and falls on your property, you don't want them to also take your business, your other home, whatever else you have. So in our business, it's standard of practice to
Thank you for your comments.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question of the speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Jackson?
Ms. Jackson, could you come back, please? Go ahead, Commissioner Martin.
Thank you. So, Ms. Jackson, as somebody who manages these units, when you receive a complaint from a neighbor or somebody else nearby one of your properties about some nuisance or some issues that are going on that are causing problems, how long does it take you to respond?
That is like an absolute emergency, and we have all hands on deck right away. I have 24-hour-a-day staff that responds to stuff like that. If there's a noise issue, we're immediately calling, texting both phone numbers that we have on file, if we can, and emails. If we can't reach them, we're literally driving there, because the last thing we want to do is impact the neighborhood. In all other cities where there are permits, you get a strike if you don't respond. So it's in everybody's best interest to respond. I didn't get through my whole list, but the 24-hour thing is ridiculous. It needs to be like an hour at the most, because when they're having an issue, it's like immediate.
Thank you.
Yes.
Lori Froelich, please.
Hello. I'd like to thank you all and Joe Baca and your team especially for addressing so much of this problem, and it looks like it's moving along and going well. A lot of the proposed ideas are great. I apologize, but I need to read because I'm not very good at speaking without a script. I'm not opposed to STRs in the city, but I do believe that they need to be strictly regulated and enforced and addressed in such a way that those who violate the rules face substantial consequences, not insignificant fines that will be just a drop in the bucket when compared to the profits being made. Breaking the law should bring about more than a slap on the wrist. I do not believe that a warning is appropriate when an owner does not comply and they don't make it clear to their renters that they cannot cause a nuisance outside the perimeter of the property. Rather, the rule is broken by the renters, becomes a strike against the owner for not taking the responsibility to make sure there is an agreement that noise levels are kept in check prior to the rental agreement being signed. There are many cities in California that have been very specific in their wording of the ordinance where it's made clear that if the law is broken, there will be considerable consequences. It should not be the responsibility of a neighboring property owner to make a complaint when laws are not adhered to and then hope that the offending group complies with the warning against breaking the law. As the law currently stands, a group is free to disturb others at will until 10 p.m. Part of the problem is the fact that too many people are allowed on a property at any one given time. There should not only be a limit to how many people are in a bedroom on a property, but to how many people can be outdoors on a property. The no limit outdoor gathering of persons needs to be considered, and the no limit should also apply to vehicles, which is already being considered. The cars parked in front and alongside neighboring properties, leaving homeowners no place for their own occupants to park. The owner of an SCR should not have the right to fill the street with vehicles that usurp the parking spaces of the other residents on any given street. Vista should not allow the freedom to create outdoor nightclubs and in some cases outdoor recreation centers in the middle of an R1 neighborhood. Vista neighborhoods are experiencing these problems. They're not zoned for these types of gatherings, so essentially they are already laws being broken. Any SDR that advertises plenty of parking and the freedom to serve alcohol to a number in excess of 2 persons per bedroom on a property is operating a commercial endeavor. This is not the same as a property owner that is on property and has an occasional party at their home. When a place is being advertised as a party house to rent becomes a business, and licenses to serve alcohol are no doubt not provided to owners of STRs in Vista. I'm sure the ordinance should be amended, read much more specifically to limits and consequences, non-adherence to limits. Please refer to sound plan, parking ordinances.
Could you sum up, please? Thank you.
Also, one other thing I wanted to bring up was the fact that in our particular situation on Crescent, the lighting which was brought up is on all night, every night. It looks like you use car lights, and it's strung with pretty lights that never go out. So I think lighting also needs to be addressed.
Thank you very much. Nicolette Ramirez.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your time. My name is Nicolette Ramirez, and I live next to a non-owner-occupied short-term rental. And I would just like to share with you some of my experiences living next to one. It has been a nightmare. Some of the issues that I have experienced personally is I have been stalked, harassed, and yelled at, not only by the Airbnb guests, as well as employees that work at the property. There was a serviceman who worked at the property, and he knows where I live, so he follows me home all the time. Also, I have seen people, unfortunately, where my room is, it's next to a balcony. I have had to hear people having inappropriate activities on the balcony, as well as inappropriate conversations and drug use. This behavior is completely unacceptable. I believe that any responsible short-term rental host would have no issue following a short-term rental permit ordinance. I believe that everybody here cares about their community here in Vista, from the people who have to live next to the short-term rentals to the hosts that have come to express their concerns as well. I am grateful that this is being addressed now with this ordinance, and I thank all the hard work that has gone into this. I have seen what an out-of-control rental has done to my personal neighborhood community, and I would like that to immediately be stopped. So I think this is a fantastic step in remedying this problem that is plaguing not just my neighborhood, but many neighborhoods within Vista. Let me see. That's it, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Daniel Hopkins?
Hey, I just saw this from home, so I rushed down just because I wanted to speak about it. I've been working on a property that I bought to turn it into a short-term rental for the last few years. I put everything I have into this. I'm going to be living in the ADU in the back that I'm building at the moment. I just, a couple things. I agree with the first speaker about the window placards. I think that's not the best thought idea. I think it is kind of a calling card for potential criminal activity. I will be living on site, but still, I'll be living in the back of the property. The front of the property is still vulnerable when there's guests not there. It's a fairly large lot. The only other thing, maybe aside from that, is notifying the neighbors on either side. I think Encinitas does that. I have a friend who has an Airbnb there. And that's what they do, is they notify the neighbors on each side before they list it. The other thing, maybe, I don't know what the permit fees are going to be, but maybe try to be relative. We're not a beach community. So I don't think the revenue is going to be what is anywhere near the beaches. And then the only other thing is, being that I will live on site, I'm not going to live in the house. Does that count as being a host? I didn't really get clarity on that, but I will be living on the property and managing everything myself. So anyways, I'm totally in favor. I really feel bad for the people that have bad experiences with short-term rentals, because I have amazing relationships with my neighbors and I plan to keep it that way. So it should be that with every single person who has plans for a short term. So anyways, I'm completely in favor, and I think some people have thrown out some great suggestions and ideas tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. That was the last speaker slip that I have. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Please come forward.
What was described would be a hosted unit that would characterize itself as being a host on site.
Very good, thank you.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. My name is Christiana Aldridge. I grew up in Vista. I've represented Vista proudly as a Strawberry Vista princess many, many moons ago. I convinced my fiance to move to Vista, and then I convinced him to get married in Vista. I would one day like to raise my family in Vista. It would be an honor for my children to be Vistonians. I'm a Vista girl through and through. The only problem is, despite my husband and I both having very well-paying jobs, We cannot afford a house here in Vista. Passing this ordinance as written is irresponsible and is causing proud members of the community to have to move to high housing prices. Please do not accept this ordinance. Please ban short-term rentals with the exception of those with a host in the unit. Thank you.
And could you fill a slip out for us? Thank you very much. Any other speakers? Please come forward.
Thank you so much, Commission, for allowing this, and thank you for the hard work of the city. I was part of that first, Representative Melendez, and it was a really great discussion. It's great to see this move forward. There's regulations that are needed. I'm a single homeowner in Vista for the last 11 years, and Airbnb as a host, I'm owner-occupied. Right away, business license, TOT. I love my city. I believe my city deserves what is meant to uphold the city. And TOTs are a joy to pay. With that in mind, I also sit on a commission. So I just wanted to give you the last several years of being owner-occupied. It's supplemented my income as a single homeowner, female homeowner, minority as well, and also in a changing of careers, being forced to change careers, it has helped supplement my income for now until I can get back on my feet with a new career. It's not something I'm getting rich off of at all. I'm just flexing my hosting skills and being a good neighbor. And very much in agreement with Kim in that short-term rentals should not be impacting the neighbors. Airbnb also has agreements that you can come into agreement with if you don't want to host under 25. It strictly speaks of no parties. It's already been laid out on Airbnb, so I don't know about what platforms these other party hosts are on, or if they're just on their own platforms. I had a question regarding the guest house provision, or like the definition, and also there was one other thing, but it's lost my mind. I'll have to call in and ask again. But I'm for the ordinance because regulation is needed. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing and open it up for Planning Commission discussion. Commissioner Hastings.
I'm just so impressed with the response from the public. I think it really makes me feel good to know that we have a city that is spending time and effort and consideration on doing the right thing, and that there are neighbors and residents who respond to that and want to improve on what the city does. So that, I think some of your stories were just awful. I'm really sorry about that. It sounded to me like an awful lot of the issues revolve around the most difficult part, which is enforcement. First, deciding on what's appropriate to be enforced, right? The 24-hour thing obviously came up as not good enough. But once that enforcement piece is there and agreed on, how do you do it right? And how does Vista find the resources to do it well and right? That's a question. I don't have an answer. But, so thank you all for all your input.
Commissioner Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Vaca, we heard from a couple of neighbors of STRs as well as a person who manages STRs that the 24-hour response time is not appropriate. Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yes. So it was drafted to say as soon as practically possible, but within 24 hours at the latest. And if the commission prefers going with a shorter leash on that, staff's okay with that. Just makes enforcement actually easier. When the ordinance is very clear and the requirements are black and white, it makes enforcement easier. So 1 to 2 hours is probably reasonable.
Okay, and secondly, as I read through the ordinance, I kind of like the placard requirement on the front. I see those, I'm up in Big Bear a lot, and I see those on a lot of houses up there. But hearing from some of the owners of these properties, I do kind of agree with some of what they're saying regarding safety. Do you want to give us a comment on that as well?
Staff has been working on the permitting process, the actual nuts and bolts of how the permit will be effectuated. And we anticipate that when someone obtains a short-term rental permit, we're going to post that short-term rental permit on a website that'll be part of the Community Development Department's webpage, and it'll be public information. I personally think that the sign in front is good. I think it's transparent for the community. And if you're operating a short-term rental properly, subject to compliance with all the regulations, it should be a non-issue at all. And so I feel like more information for the public is better. And so we plan to post permits online, but I personally feel like the sign is appropriate. It lets everyone know it's a short-term rental permitted facility, and that there's a number available for the community on site also. Because there may be a neighbor that doesn't have internet access next door, but the sign in the window is as clear as day.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I think that's all the comments I have. Questions?
Commissioner DeJesus?
That was an impressive amount of information from the community, and I thank you for that. It makes me withdraw my comments earlier, and that if you had a wedding there every night, it might be a problem. You know, that's not a good thing. So we're all Vista residents up here ourselves. You know, I've had a bad neighbor that lived next to us for 3 years that played music every night so loud. I can't imagine what you've been through. I commend staff for doing such a great job. I'm concerned about the notification placard, but I'm going to leave it in the hands of the city to keep moving forward. They've done such a great job so far. And I would encourage a less than 24-hour response time in the code. And thank you for your comments.
I have no more speakers. I'm wondering, is there a thought about a motion to change the 24-hour requirement from the commission? Does somebody want to make a motion on that?
Yes, I'll make a motion on that to, really, I'd like to see something be.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hastings was in the queue.
Okay, I'm sorry.
With some of these issues around enforcement, which are big process issues, you know, is this at a point of being able to be passed by the commission with just a change on the 24-hour thing? That's a question for my fellow commissioners, I assume.
I'd like to see that shorter time frame I also like the idea that was suggested of having kind of a dedicated phone line where if I have a neighbor that's out of line at 10:30 at night, I have a phone number that I could call to. I think that puts the caller basically on record as to when the offense is taking place, and also, giving a specific address. I also like the idea of the number of outdoor persons. And we have seen over the years the struggle with parking. Whether it's on a public street or private street, we always seem to have issues with parking. So those are some of the things that I think would be good if we could have staff readdress in that packet before it goes to City Council.
Commissioner Hastings? Okay. Okay, that's all right. Okay, I have no more speakers. What's the pleasure of the commission? Commissioner DeJesus?
It's a motion question. If I could make a motion to pass it as it's written, but amend I don't know what the word would be, to add to it later or add to it now the decrease in hours response and the phone line. I agree with the phone line. How would we word that?
So I'll take that. And we already have a dedicated phone number, and we can make that part of the permitting process administratively for our code compliance staff. So that's something that we can address. It doesn't need to be in the ordinance because we already have that. And
Okay.
we'll make that part of our process. I would just recommend that in the actual ordinance, that whatever the motion is, we'll strike 24 hours and replace it with whatever the pleasure is of the commission, whether it's 1 hour, 6 hours, 2 hours, whatever you guys feel is appropriate. And we'll just change 24 to 1, 2, or 6, or whatever the commission recommends. And with that, I think we're in good shape. In regards to enforcement, we definitely have strong teeth drafted into this ordinance for enforcement. So we feel very confident with the enforcement mechanisms.
And I have another question. 2 cities were cited, Carlsbad and Oceanside, who have their own police departments. I know we have sheriff, and that's great, but I mean, that sometimes makes a difference in response time. I want to be fair to staff in the city, and what I'm going to suggest, would it be feasible to say 6 hours? Would it be feasible to say 1 hour? Even if we say 1 hour, I don't think, are we asking for a response time in an hour? What is that?
So no, we're asking for compliance by the permittee and/or occupants and/or owner
Okay.
within an hour, 2 hours, 6 hours. So it's on, the onus is on the short-term rental permit. It's not on the police. And quite honestly, the police have very important calls for service, and we would anticipate that the majority of calls for complaints on short-term rentals would be handled by our code enforcement staff.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. I can make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'm still on the skateboard ramp over here. Let me get to the right one. Sorry. It's right here in my hand. I make a motion to approve item P24-0079 with the change to the response time to 1 hour and the rest as written.
You have that?
We're good. We're just now need a second.
Very good. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay. We shall vote. Lock in your votes, please. And it passes unanimously. If it's okay with the commission, I'd like to take a 5-minute break.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, maybe if they had a gummy before they came down, they won't want to even get out of their chairs.
We can have a little refreshment.
Yeah.
Do you need that sign? Yeah. So what do I need to put on there? Oh, you're welcome. Have a good day. Oh, it's okay. What do you need to do? I'm sorry. Perfect. What do I need to sign? Right here? You're welcome.
This is a really good start.
There you go. Have a good day.
Vacation rentals or I think those are going to be Encinitas, as well as that they are
Hi.
Have a good night.
All right, take care. That's what I said, yeah, I remember seeing. I was thinking how cool it is.
Yeah.
Is that's great.
Yeah. He's really happy. He loves it.
So he works, what, 3 days a week, and then
Yeah,
for
so he's,
24 hours?
he's on and off for 4 shifts, 24-hour shifts, on and off 4 shifts. Then he has 4 days.
I just want to reiterate to everyone that the next public hearing on short-term rental permit will be on May 28th.
I used to say we should have been fired.
So for all of you in attendance on this short-term rental permit ordinance, it's going to City Council on May 28th. So hopefully you can come to that.
You're back together. If we could get everybody back together, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, the final public hearing tonight is P 240107, which is a public hearing to amend the code to regulate and allow temporary cannabis events. If I could have a staff report, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman Grimm and members of the Planning Commission. Again, my name is Joe Vaca. I'm the Director of Community Development. I'll be presenting this item this evening. So in November of 2018, at the general election, the voters of Vista passed Measure Z, which is allowing commercial cannabis within the city. And since that time, we've permitted 10 cannabis dispensary businesses. In March of this year, City Councilmember Green placed an item on the City Council agenda, and it was titled Cannabis Consumption Events on Private Property. And the council discussed that item, and there were 16 public participants. And there was input that was shared both in favor and in opposition of establishing regulations that would allow permitting cannabis consumption events. Ultimately, the council determined that an ordinance should be prepared for their consideration and presented to the Planning Commission for the regulation and permitting of temporary cannabis events, and they directed staff to proceed with necessary amendments to the municipal code and the development code. And so that's what we'll be presenting this evening. So first, we have to update the Smoking in Public Places Municipal Code Chapter 8.12, and it's proposed to update the exceptions so that it would be allowed to have designated consumption area of a temporary cannabis event that would be permitted subject to the other ordinance we'll be presenting. But essentially, smoking would be allowed at temporary cannabis events, and it would be an exception to the Smoking in Public Places ordinance. Now we'll get into the temporary use permit ordinance, chapter 18.76 in the development code. And we're proposing to amend the first section 10, where we would permit temporary cannabis events. It would require a non-refundable application fee with any application. For the purpose of temporary cannabis events and applicable law, this excludes the regulation of cannabis under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. We're also correcting a typo and issue with letter B being utilized in the existing municipal code and development code here, which is incorrectly referencing public hearing criteria, and it's going to be corrected to A, which outlines the zoning administrator process with the public hearing. So we're proposing an entirely new section to the temporary use permit ordinance. So this would be section 1876.15, and it would be for temporary cannabis events, which are defined to mean a temporary event that includes on-site sale and or consumption of cannabis goods in compliance with state law and local laws. The ordinance establishes a permitting process for cannabis temporary use permits, and it would require a public hearing at the determination and discretion of the zoning administrator on privately owned property in various zones that are particular to C1, 2, or 3, or M1, or zones, properties designated for commercial or industrial uses in our specific plans. So an applicant must comply with the city's business license requirements. They must also have an event organizer license from the California Department of Cannabis Control. They must also obtain a state temporary cannabis event license. And then any retailer must also have a local commercial adult use cannabis business license through the city, consistent with our chapter 5.95 of our municipal code. And all sales must comply with our required tax provisions of our code. We are putting into the operational requirements that the applications must provide a designated on-site rideshare area for like Uber or Lyft, for example, in addition to describing how they will provide required parking. Events will be limited in duration. Events can be 1 day, but up to a maximum of 2 consecutive days. And temporary cannabis event permits cannot cumulatively exceed 24 days per calendar year, and they'd be limited to a total of 12 temporary cannabis events per calendar year at the same location on the same private property. The event locations must not be closer than 1,000 feet from residential, park, church, or school uses. Again, the zoning administrator public hearing would require city publication and notification with a 10-day advance notice in a newspaper and notices to all property owners within a 500-foot radius of the proposed event location. Cannabis consumption cannot be visible from any public place or any non-age restricted area. The temporary cannabis event must also be restricted to persons 21 years of age or older. The sale or consumption of alcohol and/or tobacco is strictly prohibited at a cannabis event. Cannabis goods sold at events must be transported to and from the event by a licensed distributor. Continuing with the permit requirements, consumption must be expressly authorized only in state temporary cannabis event licenses. Otherwise, it would only allowed to have sale of cannabis goods by licensed retailers at the event. If consumption is permitted, part of the ordinance requirements that are proposed is that it shall only occur in a designated area, and there must be on-site certified emergency medical technicians available for the duration of the event. Only state licensed cannabis retailers, again, are authorized to conduct sales of cannabis goods at a temporary cannabis event, and the retailers must comply with all state law requirements that authorize on-site cannabis sales and consumption at temporary cannabis events. Continuing with the permit requirements, the cannabis event organizers must provide security services at events whenever cannabis goods are available for sale or consumption. The cannabis event must also utilize a driver's license scanner, and that's going to be necessary to verify age and also to authenticate the identifications of the patrons prior to them entering the event. All applicants must also provide a certificate of insurance naming the city as an additional insured with the starting of a minimum of $2 million or a larger amount specified by the zoning administrator. All waste and trash must be disposed of properly, and the events must comply with the city's noise ordinance, and the hours of events will be limited to between 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. City staff, including sheriffs and code enforcement officers, will be provided with unrestricted access to events for inspections at any time to ensure compliance with all code and permit requirements and laws. If there are issues, a temporary cannabis event permit may be immediately revoked. Number one, if there's a significant violation of requirements of this proposed ordinance or any conditions of their permit, or if the event poses any threats to public health or safety, or if the permit was issued in error or contrary to law. So if a permit is revoked, the cannabis event organizer may not reapply for any other temporary cannabis event permit for a period of 1 year. With that, staff would be requesting that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution that recommends City Council approval of the ordinance and updates that we presented this evening. And after the Planning Commission meeting this evening, we will be presenting the formal recommendation of the City Council at a public hearing on May 28th. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. Questions of Mr. Vaca?
With no questions, I just want to also thank City Attorney Amanda Guy, who was extremely helpful in crafting these regulations as well.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Hastings?
When we look at all the different requirements for where this could take place, where's the likely places that this would take place, these events?
So number one, it's on private property in our commercial and industrial zones. And I think the likely places they would take place would be at existing dispensaries.
Outdoors, probably?
Probably,
or indoors?
Probably outdoors or indoors.
Other questions? If none, I'd like to open the public hearing. I have two speaker slips. The first one is Peggy Walker.
Thank you. My name is Peggy Walker. I am a youth mentor. I'm a grandmother, and I work with San Diego County Tobacco Control. I came tonight because I oppose temporary events on private property. And reading through this, I found what I feel are compliance and enforcement challenges. For example, it says these things are required, but who is really going to ensure that consumption is not visible from any public place, that persons must be 21 or older? You referred to the scanner. But who's going to ensure that that takes place? That sale or consumption of alcohol and tobacco doesn't take place, and that only locally licensed retailers sell cannabis goods. I know that security will be required on site, but that is not code enforcement or the sheriff. I did see you refer to that, but then again, it's a matter of resources. How is the city going to ensure that those people are available to enforce these requirements? I think it's going to be very difficult to protect the community, and I'm still not clear on where these events could be held, even if they're in existing businesses. That will have an impact on the surrounding community. 2 days of continual weed smoking certainly can't be a welcome idea to anybody, even in a business area. And it's not healthy for employees who might be hired as catering staff for an event, for example. And it's contrary to smoke-free workplace laws that we worked so hard to establish through tobacco control. The very fact that an emergency medical technician must be on site during an event indicates recognition of potential health problems. So my question is, why would the city want to permit events that invite medical emergencies? It just doesn't make sense. And I would say that this is not beneficial land use. So I just urge you to inquire or to ask yourselves, what benefit does this really have to the residents of Vista and to the community? I think it's just another way to normalize marijuana. So thank you for hearing my concerns. I do have from the
Okay, thank you for your comment. Next speaker would be Becky Rapp.
Health educator. Oh, there we go. I volunteer with several youth organizations, and parents like myself are very concerned about the mental health problems of high school students, college students, and adults in general. I come tonight to oppose this agenda item as I'm especially concerned with the false narrative portrayed by the marijuana industry and their targeting of young people, their marketing and packaging of products. By allowing for outdoor events, it just opens the door further. There's no education regarding the detrimental effects marijuana can have on young adults and mental health. And these detrimental effects are not limited to consumption, but also include secondhand vapor and smoke. I'd like to provide a handout. Smoke-free is smoke-free for you to take a look at. It's titled, Nobody Should Have to Breathe Secondhand Marijuana Smoke or Vapor at Work, in Public, or Where They Live. By allowing outdoor marijuana events, residents will smell it. It undoubtedly will travel beyond the 1,000 feet distance, especially if that distance is measured door to door instead of property line to property line. To me, today's commercialized marijuana industry looks and sounds a lot like big tobacco. Together, they are working to circumvent progress on smoke-free air in our state and city, damaging the health of our most vulnerable populations, the young, the old, and those with compromised immune systems. Together, marijuana special events and other businesses normalize marijuana use and smoking. And to teens and young adults, the message sent is that marijuana is some sort of a default choice to relieving stress and anxiety. The resulting negative outcome is staggering for young adults and the families that care about them, as well as for society in physical health and mental health costs. Now is not the time to extend the influence of marijuana in our city, and we need to recognize the harm of these highly concentrated THC marijuana products and not push the false narrative by supporting outdoor special events. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Anaya Worthy. It looks like there's actually 3 names on this slip.
Good evening. My name is Debbie Matthews, and I'm with the NAACP Youth Council and the California Elevate Youth Program, which we are speaking to youth in the community about the harmful effects of drugs.
Excuse me, could you please speak into the microphone?
Sorry, you can't hear me, huh? Do I have to repeat all that? Okay. So I'm here with the youth in regards to temporary cannabis events ordinance. I'll have a youth here that's going to speak on it. We understand that it's in place, and we had some suggestions to be implemented into the ordinance, and we'd like to just speak on that a bit.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anaya Ezel. I am the secretary for the NAACP Youth Council, and gladly due to that, I've been educated a lot on the marijuana use within youth. I do want to say that one of the biggest issues that I saw happening in my community is the youth being drawn to these places that are promoting marijuana use. One of my concerns is, again, enforcement, and the 2 speakers before me also had those concerns. I believe the ID scanners are a great idea and something that could be really impactful, but I am wondering what we can do to really make sure that no one underage is going to these events and smoking marijuana. I do understand the distance of these events not being within 1,000 feet of schools and parks, but I really don't think that's going to stop the youth from coming. I'm assuming a lot of these events are going to be hiring their own security, and I'm curious to know what we can do regarding making sure that security is not letting anyone underage in. There's no really way that right now we can know for sure if no one under the age of 21 are getting into these events. Also, another thing is I think that if there are people underage getting into these events, there do need to be consequences. The youth are in trouble because of marijuana. We want our youth to be successful, so let's help them be successful, and this is one major way that we can help them. So yes, I thank you all for listening and giving me the opportunity to speak on these problems.
Thank you very much. Last slip belongs to Jacob Aldridge.
Hello, City of Vista. I just wanted to come up here and say that I like the ordinance as presented. In my anecdotal experience, weed use in general is less detrimental to the users than alcohol, for instance. My only concern is that there's no provision for the concentration of THC in the products being sold, for instance, at a bar, let's say, or like when you get a beer or wine license, is different than a liquor license. It's easier to abuse something that's stronger. I would like to see that in there, but I think that this would be a good economic benefit to the city. And again, I just see so many people using weed in a way that's better than using alcohol. So if people are going to, exercise their liberties, I would prefer to see it in this way than at a bar. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no more speakers, I will close the public hearing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Is this desk getting taller? I think it is. It is, right? Sorry, very small. Stop. Okay. Hi. Hello again. My name is Christiana Aldridge. One thing I didn't mention before because it wasn't relevant is I have a master's degree in public health. I'm very, very concerned with this ordinance. I do not believe it should go forward. I'm very concerned because didn't we already learn this about nicotine use and smoking and tobacco? We're exactly in the same position we were in before. The only thing that was able to actually deter people from smoking was laws, rules, and regulations. And that decreased smoking, which increased livelihoods, which reduced the likes of cancer. And now you're even flirting with the idea of adding an ordinance to allow an event where there's smoking is going to occur. There's already been proof that cannabis use has caused cancer. Secondhand tobacco, cannabis has caused secondhand smoke. Why are we doing this again? We learned this lesson. Why are we here? Why are we discussing this? Absolutely not. I'll discuss this with my husband. We should not be allowing this event, any sort of cannabis event, where we're glorizing the use of cannabis, especially to our youth. You heard from our youth. They said no, they don't want it. Why are we doing this? Please, no on this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers? If not, let's close the public hearing and we'll turn it back to the Planning Commission. Commissioner Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am really kind of surprised that there's no cannabis industry support that we're seeing for this tonight. So, Mr. Vaca, can you let me know if we do have any support from the industry?
There was support from the industry in March when this first went to the City Council. We have utilized an interested persons list that our city clerk maintains for people specific to cannabis, and we are sure that there are proponents of cannabis use on that interested persons list. So we sent them a courtesy notice of this public hearing. It wasn't required, but we did that as a courtesy. We published it in the newspaper. I don't know why there isn't support this evening, but I'm sure that there are supporters out there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Looney?
Yes, question for staff. On section 8.12.040, point B, if I'm understanding this correctly, smoking will be allowed in guest room accommodations in a hotel, motel, or transient lodging establishment.
That's existing law. The only thing we're doing in section 8.12.040 is adding H. And H is that the designated consumption area of a temporary cannabis event that is permitted pursuant to chapter 18.76.
Okay.
It's basically providing an exception to our smoking ordinance. However, above and beyond all of that, excuse me, cannabis is not tobacco. So in a strict application of the law, our smoking ordinance really addresses tobacco.
So our local ordinance, to clarify, our local ordinance does encompass cannabis and tobacco, therefore we need the exception to our local ordinance. But when it comes to state law employee regulations, smoke-free workplace, cannabis is an exception from state law smoke-free workplace. So our ordinance goes further than state law when it defines where smoking, quote unquote, is prohibited, and we define smoking to include cannabis and tobacco, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question. Did you do research in other communities to see how this has worked out over time, or is this new enough where there isn't that kind of data?
I reached out to the community development director of the city of Port Hueneme that I know professionally and personally, and they've allowed this in their community. They have dispensaries. They also have cannabis lounges. They also have cultivation, and they also have the industrial sector cannabis. And so he had explained that they have events and that they haven't had issues. Other than that, I think we looked at some other jurisdictions. I know Amanda did some additional research also.
I performed research in looking at the ordinances of several other cities. I can't speak to their personal experience, though, in implementing them.
But these ordinances that you saw were in effect allowing these uses.
That's correct.
Commissioner DeJesus?
A question for staff. Will an unlimited number of these be allowed on any given day? So, for example, 4/20 is a very common, April 20th is a common date where celebration of pot smoking or whatever. And let's say, can every single place that's allowed to sell marijuana be able to have a temporary use permit if all things are met? I mean, so we could have, I don't know how many are in town, how many distributors are in, collectively, could you have a whole bunch of people doing everything all but one day? Is there a limit? Can we limit the number? So
Yes, we can. So this ordinance must comply with the Measure Z criteria. Measure Z criteria limits the amount of cannabis dispensaries that we can have in town currently to 10, and we have 10. And so the way the licensing works, on top of the local business license and the state licensing, they must have the local cannabis seller license as part of the Measure Z criteria. So technically, only our 10 dispensaries in town will have those permits, and they will only be the ones allowed to sell cannabis at these events for then people to consume. So that being said, if all 10 maximize use, they could have up to 24 consecutive days, up to 12 permits. So it would be theoretically 120 permits for 240 days.
Further discussion? A motion?
I have another question for Amanda. Would that, could we rephrase it to limit the number of permits allowed, even though there are 10 dispensaries or 10 businesses? Could we say only, hypothetically, could we say we're allowing only one temporary use permit for, on any given day?
I don't think that would be reasonable, given that these properties could be widespread throughout the city, and we'd have to tie the restriction to public health, welfare, and safety concerns. And if they're widespread throughout the city and they comply with the ordinance requirements, which include things like security, the screening, no one below 21 is allowed in, et cetera, I don't think we'd have a nexus there. You would have space to reduce the number of days and events per year per dispensary if you wanted to look at that. But I wouldn't say we could cap like one event per day.
I understand what you're saying now, because if you limit one, and if you give one person one and nobody else has the right, then that kind of ruins the rule. I understand. Thank you.
Further discussion? Does somebody want to try a motion? Commissioner Hastings?
I'll be Mr. Hastings, that's fine. Oh, Commissioner, never mind. No, I'm not. I'm of two minds about this, so I just want to register that on the one hand, I'm of that generation. On the other hand, I'm not so sure that it is a good idea to have these events like this. And I don't know, it's the smoking part. I mean, there are other ways to consume cannabis, right? that don't involve secondhand smoke. Is that too limiting to talk about that, or has that thought passed through anybody's mind?
Is that a question for staff?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Sorry, Joe, but it is.
My seat just gets hotter every minute. So I think that the proponents of these events would want to have the ability to smoke and eat edibles. So I'm not a proponent and I'm not opposed. I'm doing the analysis, and based on my research, I would say that most of these events include smoking and vaping of cannabis.
If this became an immediate problem, let's say we passed it, council passed it, and they became a problem, what would staff's reaction be to that? What can you do? What arm? I mean, you can always rescind the ordinance, but.
So if there were significant health and safety issues, we could adopt an urgency ordinance moratorium and then work on any necessary ordinance updates. But we could, if there were health and safety issues and general welfare for our community that we recognize, we could adopt an urgency ordinance to stop it immediately if we needed to. If that wasn't the case and we see that there are some items that need to be enhanced or updated, we can always work on municipal code and development code amendments.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Martin?
I'll go ahead and make a motion to move this item forward, and the motion that I'll make would be to recommend to the City Council approval of the proposed ordinance as drafted by staff.
Okay, do we have a second? I will second it for discussion purposes. We have an ordinance or a recommendation before us. Any further discussion on it? I'm sorry, Commissioner DeJesus?
Can you tell me the number again? That big number you were telling me, how many they can have and what's the total number?
So there's 10 dispensaries that have the required license to participate in the cannabis TUP events. And one person can have up to 24 days per year, up to 12 events per year. So if every dispensary utilized that to the maximum, you'd have 120 events up to 240 days.
That is just math I can't wrap my head around.
I know, it sounds excessive, but we have the same criteria for our breweries in the specific plan area. And I would defer to staff because I haven't been here that long, but I don't think the breweries have maximized use of that, have they? No. So while the opportunity exists, we don't anticipate that being maximized. Now, it could happen, but I do also agree with the city attorney guy that they would have to be spaced out appropriately, and they'd be competing like any other business.
Can we add a condition that would require a review at the council level of this ordinance every 6 months or after 6 months?
You can. I think 6 months might be short.
Year?
I'd say maybe a year. And I would, if you're going to do that, I would please encourage that the recommendation included as a consent item, as a status update.
I don't have a problem with the motion and the second on here at this point. I have a gut, feeling about everybody in this room that's made a comment that, isn't for it, that I understand that, but I also understand that the businesses in Vista that do business here that are allowed by law to do certain things, and we have an ordinance here in place, or that's being proposed, and the staff has done all the work, and Amanda's done the research to make it part of our code, and I respect that. So if the breweries have these types of events and, if we had Mothers Against Drunk Drivers or other people that were opposed to drinking, it'd be a different story. It'd be the same story, I guess. And being as a planning commissioner, we not only hear those types of things, we hear about electricity and phone trees and all sorts of things where we know there's a danger to it. And it's not a comfortable position to be in, but there's also a right to businesses to make a living. And if we don't have something like this in place, then we have no way to regulate it or allow the business to thrive if they want to. So with that, I'm good.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, we do have a motion on the floor. Take a vote, please.
Pardon me, I just wanted for clarification purposes.
Yes.
So your motion is to recommend city council approval of the ordinance. Is it including the status update annually as a consent item?
I didn't check with the person that made the motion. I would like to see that, but I'm not sure if the Commissioner Martin would want that in his motion or not, so I can ask him.
I would be okay with staff preparing a consent item for the council, basically outlining how the ordinance is performing and analyzing whether amendments should be considered.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, lock your votes in, please. Motion passes with a 4-1-1 vote. And the next,
Just for clarification purposes, the roll call showed an abstention for Commissioner Hastings. Was that your intention?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you state on the record your reason for abstention in voting?
I'll turn my mic on. Yes, it was what I said before. I am of two minds of this. I have not been able to make up my mind. I don't know if that's legitimate or not, but that's my sense at the moment. I usually have opinions, but
I mean, in general, so abstentions are reserved for when there's conflict of interest, when you can't vote on the item due to a conflict.
Well,
Not due to the inability to decide on the issue. So we can't, because there'd be many circumstances in your role and everyone's role on this commission where it may be difficult to decide. So we should take another vote, and even if it's difficult, there should be a yay or a nay vote.
okay.
okay, let's reset. Passes 5-1. Very good, thank you. Next item of business is reports from the Planning Commission. Any planning commissioners have anything they want to report? If not, report from staff? I'm sorry, Commissioner Looney?
Not a report, but I have heard and read of Green Oak Ranch being up for sale, where the county is planning a homeless facility, and I would like to get input from staff as to what knowledge they have of that being proposed literally in our backyard.
Ms. Guy will respond to that.
There have been discussions at the council level regarding this issue. So I can tell you that the city council is aware of that issue and is monitoring it. And as events unfold, the city may involve itself in negotiations. But there's closed session discussions that I can't divulge here. So I can just simply tell you that the appropriate decision makers are aware of the issue.
Okay, thank you, because where these facilities have typically been built, they change the demographics. It changed parking, it changes the property values, and it needs, and I don't know, because I think it's county property. Is it in the city?
It's within the city of Vista.
So how is it that this county has authority to supersede city request?
They don't have authority to supersede our zoning. So if they acquired the property, then they would still have to permit any use if it was subject to permitting requirements. So what I'm aware of is that there might be a land sale of that property, but whoever is the property owner would still have to get entitlements if entitlements are required for the use.
But the article was documenting that the county board of supervisors are making the shots and making the decisions.
I'm aware that the county board of supervisors has had their own discussions on making a proposal to purchase the property, but it is a city of, like, our own staff have been approached over the years for uses of that property. So we are the permitting authority. We're on the same plane as the county when it comes to permitting authority. They don't have superior authority over a charter city.
Okay. I think it would be good to keep the commissioners fully informed of what's going on, because it will impact our city, especially in that area, in a significant manner. So I'm just expressing my concern for that.
Okay, a report from staff?
Okay, looks like the May 21st meeting is going to get canceled, so you can take that off your calendar. However, you cannot take June 4th. The June 4th would be the next meeting. Looks like there'll be 4 items on that night. And June 18th, subsequent to that, 2 items, so we're going to be back to back in June. But you do get a little break, so May 21st, we won't be here. Thank you very much.
Very good. Mr. Vaca?
Thank you very much, Chairman Grimm. I want to highlight that both of these ordinances will now go to the City Council on May 28th, along with the very important item that staff has been preparing for. We're having a general plan update to present to the City Council the findings and input that we received from the second series of workshops that we did on the general plan update specific to the proposed land use alternatives of the general plan, and we are going to be asking the City Council for their input on which preferred land use alternative will be selected to move forward with drafting the general plan. And then there are also 3 private property owners that have made independent requests to have their properties considered for land use designation changes to be included in the general plan update. That is all going to the City Council for their review and discussion and action on the 28th also. So we have these 2 public hearings and then the general plan update and trying to get direction from the council on the preferred land use alternative. So it's going to be a lively meeting, and we'd love it if you'd all come and participate.
Okay, do we have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Do we have to have a motion for adjournment?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. We've
We're
never,
adjourned. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.